As you just heard, I was only asked 2 days ago to prepare this talk, and I would have loved to have talked about the conservation of wild flowers, which is what I do. But it really was impossible to put together a general talk in that period. So what I tried to do is to take an example, which is going to be sticky catchfly, as an endangered plant, and along with the theme of this conference, I'm going to talk about the conservation of sticky catchfly in central Scotland, past, present and future. Now, I picked sticky catchfly. The Scottish Wildlife Trust that I work with conserves lots of wild flowers, but I've picked sticky catchfly on purpose. Firstly, because the fourth naturalist and historian has had a lot to do and an active role in conserving it, which is something you may not think of the fourth naturalist doing. And secondly, as you've just heard, we have the biggest population of this plant in the UK, and it's all in this new forest, which the speaker that had to call off is managing. And so it allows me to talk a little bit about the part of the formation of the new Demaya forestry, at least as it relates to this plant. Okay, can everybody hear me incidentally?
Yeah.
This lecture theatre, when I first came to Surrey, I was a lecturer here, was a museum. And if you go outside, all the cabinets are arranged down the corridor. And they're quite interesting. But it had purpose-built cabinets and everything. But I did do some lecturing in here, and I found this the most awkward of all the lecture theatres, because if you're standing there and you need to write on here, and your notes are over there, it's very difficult, and they obviously haven't changed it. So let's go on. Now, sticky catchfly, can you go back one actually? I think we missed one.
Yes, sorry.
Uh-oh.
No, don't panic. If I can't do it, Melissa will be able to.
As you'll see, Melissa has been my assistant. And she's in many of the pictures in here. So this is sticky catchfly. It's a really beautiful plant. One of the dangers is that people will find it and dig it up and put it in their gardens. It grows on south-facing cliff faces, on the ledges. And so the cliffs, which if you could look out over there, the cliffs all the way along between the university and Alva are the perfect place for it. And that's why we've actually got the biggest population. Now it gets its name from the fact, next one, that the stems are covered with a sort of non-drying varnish. And this is thought is there so that things like ants that try to get up to the nectaries and to the anthers for pollen get stuck in this, and so they're unable to steal it. But it's also probably true that when these animals' carcasses degenerate, they produce nitrogen compounds which help the plant grow, because it lives, as you shall see later on cliff faces, in a very non-nutritious environment. Next slide. Now, the title of the theme of this conference then was past, present and future. And I'm going to stick to that. So what about sticky catchfly's past? I'm sure you all recognise this. This is Arthur's Seat in Holyrood Park. And the first time record we have of this plant was in John Ray's catalogue of British plants in 1670. And he, in Latin, I'm not going to try and speak Latin, but he records that it was found in the park in Edinburgh. Now, he didn't actually find it. The Royal Society found that this plant was in Holyrood Park, and they sent their official collector up to record it. He recorded it over here on what's called Sampson's Ribs, and it's still there, amazingly. Next slide. And you can see it grows in the cracks in the rock face here. It nearly became extinct, and it's only really there because of the efforts of the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. The last time I went there were 45 plants, but there have been much less than that. It is, in fact, Edinburgh's floral emblem, but Edinburgh doesn't deserve it. But it's only got 45 plants, and Clackmannanshire, who've got Dog's Mercury as its emblem, has got 4,000 plants. And so we've got to look after those. Next one. The first local record comes from an unlikely source, actually. This guy, Hutton Forest, when the spa was being set up in Bridge of Allen, the hydropathic establishment, as it's called, he was asked to do chemical surveys of the water to find out what was in there and what was doing everybody so much good. And he must have had a bit of space left in the little booklet that he produced, because at the end, he made a list of plants, rare plants or interesting plants, I think he called them, that people might like to go on their walks and visit. And one of these was sticky catchfly, and he said that it was abundant on the cliff faces underneath the Wallace Monument. Well, since then, we can trace the history of all those plants in the Fourth Naturalist. And if we look at all the articles on it, we found that in 1983, there were only 3 plants left, and they didn't flower. And since then, I'm afraid, it's disappeared from that site. Now, there have been a number of articles on sticky catchfly in the Fourth Naturalist. This is the cover of one of the volumes, but it's the very first volume of the Fourth Naturalist that's so important. There's an article in there in 1976 by Eddie Blake, Peter Wallace, and John Proctor, which actually they surveyed not the Abbey Craig with the Wallace Monument on it, but the cliffs, which you can see from the university here, stretching along to Alba. And they found there was a huge number of plants which was not really recognised. They recorded 1,195 plants. Peter Wallace was an undergraduate student, and this was his final year project, and his supervisor was John Proctor. Eddie Blake was, I was going to say a strange man, but he lived in this room, in fact. He was given a place by the head of department to have a desk in the museum, and it was always there whenever, he never seemed to go away, but he was the person, I think, who found these plants. One large colony that I've got to talk about is within reach of the university. Those of you who know Logan Kirkyard, the cliffs behind that, the old dilapidated church, behind that are the cliffs called Yellow Crags, and they had a large number on it, and the great virtue of them was that they were accessible. So we've been able to count them and watch them, and you'll see the numbers coming up later on. Right, next one. Now, this is a map from the Botanical Society of the British Isles Atlas in about the year 2000. And you can see this is the distribution of sticky catchfly. There are 2 colonies in Wales, right on the Welsh border, both in quarries where they grow on the cliffs. And the rest of the sites for this plant are all in Scotland. It doesn't show the importance of these sites. Botanists aren't very good at recording numbers, actually. It makes them all look the same. But this site here has got 3 sticky catchfly plants in it, and this one's got 4,000. So by far the most important of these is the one on the Hillfoots. Since then, I've actually written to all the recorders in these areas. The Botanical Society has recorders in vice counties, and many of these sites haven't had sticky catchfly in for long periods. The plants tend to be looked after by an attentive botanist, and they keep the gorse in particular away. And when they die, so does the sticky catchflies with it. So there are only probably 10 sites at the very most where you find this plant today. Now there are 2 down here on the Solway which I visited and have pictures to show you. Can you just... So this is in a picture in a book by Philip Lusby where he was writing up a series of accounts of some of Scotland's threatened plants. And this was his picture of sticky catchfly. And it's down on the Solway coast. And you can see there's quite a few plants here. It's now an SSSI, not for sticky catchfly, because, but for cormorants. These are much rarer than cormorants, I think. But we went down and we could easily find this site because of all the rocks. Next slide. And unfortunately, although there were lots of plants there, it's beautiful to see it like a big rock garden in the spring, there was no sticky catchfly. Well, we thought maybe we've got there too early or too late in the season and we couldn't see the plants because you'd have to look through binoculars to see them. However, down the coast there was another dot and we went there and we found, next slide, we found 3 bedraggled plants all in flower. So, and the numbers on this second site had declined from 17 in 2003 down to 3 when we went in 2016. So the image that I want to give to you is that these lovely plants are declining almost everywhere, including in our own spot. Next slide. Okay. Now I'm coming to what I call the present. This is the year 2000 or just after. Local authorities at this time were producing what were called local biodiversity action plans. They usually employed somebody to do this, who sat down and worked out the threatened species in the area. This would not have just been plants, of course, lots of other things like red squirrels or whatever, eagles. And they had to, first of all, work out how threatened they were and make some judgment about that. And sticky catchfly obviously passed the test. They then worked out what would be their objectives in managing it. And these were the objectives: to maintain the population along between here and Alva, to undertake a monitoring program to see how the populations were doing, and to promote local awareness. And then they drew up a management plan. In this year, we're going to do this and so on. And the Scottish Wildlife Trust took it over. Next slide. So here's my helper down in the front row. What we've done then is there were about 100 plants on this particular patch when Peter Wallace and Eddie Blake and these people went there in 1976. By the time we looked, there were 240. But then there was a very sharp rise in the numbers, up to about 1,000. So this picture would have been taken then. The whole cliff would have been covered in these lovely flowers. And this was due to the fact that the farmer who had the adjacent land, 4 of his best tups got in here and died. Not quite sure how. So he put a fence around this area, and the sticky catchfly said thank you and did very well. What I was rather frightened by when I put this table together yesterday was what's happened since, that the numbers have been coming steadily down. And that is due to the fact that we've had so many dry springs in May. And when I went a couple of years ago, this was like straw. The plants have survived, but they don't flower, or if they do flower, the flower spikes wilt and you can't see them. So I'm not too worried about this, but it's certainly something we must keep an eye on. Next slide. Now, an important contribution of the fourth naturalist here was in 2013. It was the year of Natural Scotland, and SNH, as it was then, gave money, small amounts of money out as grants to carry out projects. And Richard Tipping suggested to the SNH that he should put some money aside and award it to people who were prepared to go back and look at some of the very original surveys in the 1970s that were recorded in the Fourth Naturalist. And one of those surveys, of course, as I was just telling you, the Peter Wallace survey, 1976, was in the very first volume. And the Stirling University Nature Society, headed in those days by Stuart Bentz and Lorna Blackmore, they said they would like to follow up this paper and see how many sticky catchfly plants there were where Peter Wallace had originally trodden. So they spent 2 weeks. They were incredibly fit, running up and down these slopes, walking along the top, walking along the bottom, going up through here and that sort of thing. And they, astonishingly, really, recorded 3,900 spikes, which is a huge number. You know, in Wales, they've got 10, something like that. So this was a really important contribution. And they wrote it up, and that was a condition, I think, of the grant, and it's published in the Fourth Naturalist and Historian Journal. Next one. While this was going on, we harvested seed. And to get more seed, we grew this seed up on the allotments in Ricky Valley, and it's incredibly floriferous and produces vast numbers of seeds. And now we've got pots, next one. We've got 2 jam jars full of seed, and I bet there's 1 million seeds in here. So we've got the world's supply of sticky catchfly. We started to grow them up, and we went to the Yellow Crags place where we'd done the recording, and we've been planting them out. And this is our chairman at the time. You may recognise him, Guy Harewood, who was biodiversity officer as well as chairman of the local SWT, planting them out. And these plants did well, but they're getting overgrown by broom and gorse at the moment. Next one. Here's my helper again, Melissa in the front row, in case you don't recognise her. This is another colony that we went to, and this is at the other end of the Ochils. It's an outlier, really. Originally, the edges of a railway cutting near Glenfarg had this growing around it. In fact, around the entrance to a tunnel. But when the trains were stopped, the trees grew up and these were lost. But on the way up to, what's the name? The recycling centre, Bins, I think it's called. Yeah, Bins. The recycling people have got a big place there. And they have a road which has a cliff at the side of it. There was another colony, and the numbers there were going down, so there were only 64 spikes. And that was because this area was completely covered in gorse. And I went up with Melissa to help me. I wasn't much help myself, and she got this long pruner, and we cut all the gorse from here. And there was an amazing, the next summer, there was an amazing increase in the number of flowers. So this 10 hours work saved a colony of sticky catchfly. And it's time we went back, Melissa. The next slide. We had to, you remember, draw the public's attention to this. So we got hold of Keith Brown, the local NSP, and said, would you become the species champion for sticky catchfly? It's in your constituency. And he readily agreed. And as you know, I don't know if you know the species champion scheme, but most MPs in Scotland, much to the envy, I may say, of the National Parliament down south, most MPs in Scotland have a species which is threatened, which they become the champion for. And once a year, they're allowed, there's a debate, and they're allowed to speak about it. And Keith Brown did that for us. These plants grew up, here they are, and we decided to try and plant them out in Alva Glen. So these are sticky catchfly plants. Next one. Now, the Alva Glen Heritage Trust is wonderful. They said, yeah, that's a good idea. Now, the reason we went there was that Lorna and Stuart had found that there were no sticky catchflies when they did their survey, although there had been previous to that. They'd been eaten by sheep And so we took these plants up and prayed, and they helped us, as you can see, the Albert Glen Heritage Trust, people helped us plant them out, and they then collected seeds from their plant, and they've subsequently grown them up. So now we have 69 plants in the Glen, and when I last went up in 2020, there were 37 of them flowered. Next one. Right, now the future. Well, this is the guy who should have spoken today, Lindsay, and this is his colleague, Jamie, and they are members of the Future Forestry Company, future being the key word here. Now, this company has bought a large area around Demyat. Here's the top of Demyat. This is the road from the university along to Menstrie, Alba, and Dollar. And you can see that from the caravan park or from the cemetery next to the university here, they own the land all along the road here to Menstrie. And the land that they own stretches right back up past the Loss, over the top of Demyat, past the Loss Reservoir and onto Loss Hill up there. It's a huge area. Their raison d'etre really is to grow woodlands and to collect money from for the sequestration of carbon. But you can see that their aims in terms of forestry are very modest. All these coloured areas here are where they want to put trees, and the trees are really interesting. All this pale yellow is oak, not Sitka spruce. All the brown areas are birch, not Sitka spruce. And these dark green areas in the middle are oak, which is commercial oak, and I don't see any Sitka spruce. So that is definitely a big plus. Then there are all these other areas, like all the hillfoots where our sticky catchfly was. Just realised I missed a slide somewhere. Anyway, and the other great piece of luck was that this guy is the chairman of Botanical Society of the British Isles, whose maps I showed you earlier on. Now he knew that the sticky catchfly here, and so he knew that I was trying to conserve it, and he immediately came to see me. And by this time, as you'll see in a moment, we actually were engaged with students from this university. Now this site here is about 10 minutes away walking. So students who wanted to get practical experience could leave a lecture and go and get it, conserving sticky catchfly here. Now on this bit, next slide, this is the area he suggested should become an experimental area. And so we were going to grow up sticky catchfly and plant it out on these slopes. Before we do that, of course, we've got to get rid of a lot of this gorse. Gorse overgrows the plants and you've had it. Next slide. So I had 12 plants. He confronted us with this about last February, I suppose. And I said, well, we've got some plants. Let's put them up there and see how they go. And so we put 12 plants up, and all of them made it through the summer in spite of the drought. And most of them flowered. So things look good. Now, the reason that there are none of these plants there at the present, or there weren't any, was that this area has been heavily grazed by sheep. And it's not only sticky catchfly that's missing, but lots of other plants too. But that's by the way. So things look good. Now, during the COVID crisis, next slide, I was approached by students doing degrees in conservation biology and ecology and these sorts of things, who felt they're never going to get jobs because in COVID there were no practical classes. Could we do something about that? Which we endeavoured to do. But when Lindsay realised there were students here, he said, well, why don't you get the students to get their experience on the site next door? Now, I went to university at King's College. There wasn't a single tree within miles of King's College in the Strand. And here they are with the perfect setup. So these were some of the original group of 12, about 10 girls. And we grew up the seedlings, and here they've just pricked all these out. And now these have grown up and they're in 5-inch pots. And we've started to plant them out. Next slide. So here is Lindsay, your missing speaker, teaching this student to use something called a potty pookie. Don't know whether you come across there, that's Finnish. We're very lucky to have 2 students who spoke Finnish actually in the group. And this saves you bending your back when you plant. It's a really great thing. And here are some more students clearing the gorse. And we just started this a few weeks ago. So let's start. I can't remember what it is. So this is what the future is. These are members of that student group. They're getting trained up. We have the perfect person. We've already planted thousands of plugs all over this area where there was no forestry, and Lindsay's been in charge of that, the speaker who's missing. So I think the future looks good. Next slide. Well, I don't know how the time's going, but
yeah,
it's it, is it?
yes,
pretty
much. Yeah. But
I didn't want to leave you with the opinion that the only thing the Scottish Wildlife Trust looks after is sticky catchfly. It is high on our list, and it's certainly high on my list, but we look after lots of other plants too. For instance, this is a butterfly orchid. We have just arranged really to move this the butterfly orchids, which are in a meadow at Clean. It's a wonderful meadow at the back of the primary school, but they wanted it for housing. And the local authority, as a result of us pushing, told them they could only put houses there if they would dig these up and transfer them. And that's what they did. The only thing that's left there is the name of the estate. It's called the Orchid Estate, without a single orchid in it. But the orchids were moved into Clean Country Park. This is a plant we've been looking at the reservoir at the tops of the hills there. This is called Petty Whin. There's only 1 or 2 plants, but we've been taking the seed and growing them up and replanting them. But there's a whole list of things here. Broadleaf helleborines, an orchid, cowslips, we'll come to in a minute, Petty Whin, frog orchids, juniper, greater butterfly orchids, yellow figwort, devil's bit scabiouses, sweet violets. The woods in Bridge of Allen used to be full of sweet violets, and there's only 1 plant now. Rock rose, globe flowers, herb parish, rest harrow. These are all plants that we're looking after, hopefully in the same way as sticky catchfly. I just wanted to come back to this one. On this campus, there are old fields with parasites in them. And we've collected seed, and the seeds have grown up. And next week, we're going to plant them into one of those meadows on the hillside. So a meadow which has had sheep in it for hundreds of years. If you walked it between the cemetery and Blair Lobey, along that path, there is going to be wildflower meadows. So the speaker that's missing has really got an important job. The future of this area, and sticky catchfly in particular, is in his hands. And I think they're very capable hands. Thank you.